I am Mother St. John Fontbonne, and I have been asked to come today to tell you a little bit about the history of the Sisters of St. Joseph. Now, when I tell you this history, I'm not going to tell you a lot of dates and a lot of events. Did you know that of all the religious congregations founded in the world in the history of the church, only 25% of them still exist? And of those that were founded and died out, they only lasted about 25 years. So why are we here, the Sisters of St. Joseph? Why are we still here on this sacred ground 372 years later? I believe it's because God always sent us the right people at the right time. So let's look at some of those people. Back in 1650 in France, there was a Jesuit who had this crazy idea that women religious could do all they were capable of doing. Imagine that, a woman doing all she was capable of doing. So he decided to found the Sisters of St. Joseph. And he asked us to divide the city and go out and serve the dear neighbor. He gathered 6 women together to do that. And they began to gather around and go out to the city to serve. Now, if that wasn't crazy enough, imagine that God sent at that time a bishop who agreed with him, who said, yes, these women can do all that they are capable of doing. And he not only blessed us, he made us one of the first apostolic communities in the church. And so the Sisters of St. Joseph flourished. They flourished. I, Mother St. John Fontbonne, didn't come along until 100 years later. People asked me who this founder, Jesuit Father Madai, what he was like. And I say, I wouldn't know him if he died in my arms. I came 100 years later, and the community was flourishing at that time. I entered with my sister, who also came with me, and we became Sisters of St. Joseph. I was appointed a superior at the age of 26. So you know that I had heavy responsibilities from the beginning. And we were doing fine, but then we began to feel a certain unrest. We would have laywomen come into the house and help us sew clothes for the poor, or help us do other things with the poor. And we began to hear them and hear them talk. And there was unrest. When we went out on the streets, we knew that there was unrest, much like today. Taxes were way too high. There was a shortage of bread. There was a struggle for power. And it wasn't the Republicans and the Democrats in those days. It was the Pope and the King, the church and the state. And there was great division. And people were asking to choose sides. And we were going to side with the church no matter what. But our pastor, he decided that he would side with the king. And one night he sent a band of army to our house and knocked on the door. Now, you're going to read in the history books that it said, they knocked on the door and Mother St. John went and said, what do you want? And they said, we want all the sacred vessels. And I said, never. That's not how I remember it. I remember it, they were knocking on the door and my knees shaking. And I'm saying, what do you want? And they said, all the sacred vessels. And I said, no. And history will say they turned around and said, what a woman. Well, they turned around and said something about me, but I guarantee you it wasn't what a woman. But we knew that night that we were no longer safe, that they wouldn't respect us, that they would come into the house, they would do whatever they wanted with us, with the sacred vessels. So we left, and we all went back to our homes. And it appeared at that time, at the start of the French Revolution, it appeared that religious life had died. All the convents closed, all the women went back to their homes, and we simply could not continue to exist as women religious in the church. When I went home, I learned that my parents, who were very devout Catholics, had turned our house into a house of sanctuary for all the priests who had sided with the Pope. And they would come in and maybe go out into the backwoods and say Mass for people, hear their confessions, and then come back to our house. Our pastor was very vindictive, and he sent those same men to my parents' home to arrest me. Now, I knew if they came into the house that they would find all these priests as well. So I went outside, my sister joined me, and we went outside and we gave ourselves up. So they arrested us and we were imprisoned. And we were told we were going to be guillotined. Now that was no idle threat. Sisters of St. Joseph had already been guillotined. So I knew that that was going to be possible. What are the chances that the night before I was to be guillotined, the revolution ended and I was set free? And I went home and continued to do all that I could do. Continue to divide the city, serve the dear neighbor. Now I have to say that we did it wearing this garb. When we were first founded and we were told to go out and divide the city, no woman could be out of the house without a male escort. That's what was so unique about having women do all they could capable of doing. They couldn't even leave the house without a male escort. The only people who could go out without a male escort were widows. So we dressed as the widow in 1650. And this is what we took on as our dress, because we could go out and work without having a man supervising everything we were doing. And we continued to wear that. I wore that even when I left and went back home. I wore it even in the city as I went out and worked with the people there. We continued to wear this. We didn't stop wearing it until back like in 1965, when the church said, if you were founded to do what you do in secret, then why are you dressed, gaining so much prestige and having everybody look at you and know who you are? So it was then that we decided to change the habit and wear the ordinary clothes that the sisters are wearing today, because that's what we were meant to do. We were meant to be regular people doing all that we could possibly do for the gospel, for the church, for the dear neighbor. So I went home wearing this still, and obviously I stood out a little bit 100 years later, but I was minding my own business, trying to be a good sister of St. Joseph, even though we weren't in convents anymore. And Napoleon came to power. Now, Napoleon hated women religious. He saw them all as women who entered a monastery, lived behind a grill, did nothing. He saw them as lazy women and had wanted nothing to do with them. Now, what are the chances that Napoleon would have an uncle who was not only a Catholic bishop, but a cardinal in the church? And this cardinal uncle said to Napoleon, "Well, I know of women who were doing a lot of good things before the revolution. They were out on the street caring for the people. Maybe, just maybe, they could help you rebuild France." And Napoleon said, "Okay, I'll let you talk to them about coming back to their convents, but they may not be in monasteries. I want them active. I want them out in France, serving, building. I do not want them in monasteries behind the grill." So the cardinal had permission to do that. Now, how in the world was he going to do that? He had had some women come to him and say they wanted to start religious life again, but they were monastic women. They had been behind the grill in a monastery. He didn't quite know what to do, and he was having dinner one night with a priest who was just traveling through giving a retreat. And he happened to mention this to this priest. Now, what are the chances that this priest would have known me, and I had even been to confession to him a couple of times? And he said to the cardinal, "I think I know a lady who could help you." So the cardinal sent for me, and I came, and he told me he wanted me to refound the Sisters of St. Joseph. So we have John Pierre Medai, who started us back in 1650, and we have Mother St. John Fontbonne, who started us again in the early 1800s. So we were refounding. And that's why all this talk about religious life dying today, the sisters are dead, they're going out of existence. That means nothing to the Sisters of St. Joseph. Been there, done that. We can revive, we can come to life again. We will revive, we will come to life again. So I came in and I started with these 9 women. And the community again flourished. There were all these Sisters of St. Joseph who had to go back home, and they wanted to come back to religious life. They re-entered. There were all these women who had never heard of religious life before, but saw the good we were doing, and they entered. So the community grew and grew and grew. And we began again to go out and serve the dear neighbor. One of the things we did was we had a special ministry to prostitutes, because those women could not do anything except sell themselves in order to make a living. So we taught them how to make lace so they could have their own income and their own living. And we taught them how to make lace. That was one of our first ministries in France. And we always say, when you ask us about the future of religious life, we'll say, the lace is not finished. So we continue to go, and we grew rapidly, as I say, in France. And women would come to the house to ask us if they could help, and they would sew clothes, they would do different things. Now, what are the chances that one of the women that came was extremely wealthy? She had been widowed twice, and both husbands left her a great deal of money. She was a countess. And what are the chances that this very wealthy woman would also be literate? That was very unique in those days, to have women be able to read. They weren't educated. So what are the chances that this very wealthy woman who could read, who knew what was going on in the world, who understood what the propagation of the faith was doing, what are the chances that she would come to our house and work with us? And she became enamored with what the sisters were doing. And as she read about what the propagation of the faith was doing across the world, she said to me one day, "Mother, I think the United States could use women like Sisters of St. Joseph. I'm reading that there are savages there, and they could use the sisters to spread the gospel and to do the works that you do here. I said, I couldn't possibly. I can't possibly send women to America when there are so many needs here in France. I don't have the personnel. She was convinced that we needed to come to America. So she sat down and wrote Bishop Rosati a letter and told him that she knew of these wonderful women doing great work in France, and would he want them to come to the United States? Now, that letter was never answered. It was never answered. Don't know what happened to it. Bishop just ignored her. So she sat down and wrote again, and she said, Bishop, I want you to know that I am writing for these women. I work with them, and I am very wealthy. Oh, she got a letter right away. What are the chances? And he said that he would like for us to come to work with the deaf. That was the great need he saw in St. Louis, was to work with the deaf. And so I asked for volunteers in France. 8 women actually volunteered. 6 came immediately, and 2 went off to learn how to work with the deaf, how to work with sign language and all. Now, just as an aside, those 2 were delayed in coming, and when they finally did show up, the bishop thought they were imposters and wasn't going to accept them, but they did eventually were accepted. But 6 women came. 2 of them were my nieces, and their brother, a priest, asked if he could accompany them. And 6 women came to the United States with the largesse of the Countess Félicité. I renamed one of the novices Félicité so she could join them when they came here in that way. They came to this site, to this sacred ground, poor, destitute. The people were so poor they could care less that there were sisters here. The village of Carondelet had the nickname of the Vide Poche, the empty pocket. And there was such poverty, so much misery. And our sisters came. And what are the chances? Look around. Look around. Out of that empty pocket, out of that nothingness, out of that poverty, here we are. If the history of the Sisters of St. Joseph isn't about God and God working in our lives and God doing so much for us, then I don't know what it's about. We came in 1836 just in time to help build the American church. It was women religious who built Catholic schools and hospitals and did social services of every kind. Our history is about God sending us the right people at the right time. And I look around and I see some of my sisters here. The right people at the right time. And then I look at all of you, and I have to ask you, why are you here? Now you may say, well, I answered an ad in the paper. Somebody contacted me and said they needed somebody to work in the print shop, so I came. I came because they were looking for somebody to work in mission advancement. I'm a chef, So I came. I work in maintenance. I came. You were called. You were called to be here. You are the right people at this right time in our history. A little known fact about Mother St. John Fontbonne is that she was superior before the Revolution, she was superior after the Revolution. She stayed superior, and even in her old age, when they were going to elect another superior, the bishop said, "You may not elect Mother St. John Fontbonne. She's been in office too long." So the sisters, doing all women are capable of doing, elected me. The next time I was to be elected, the bishop said, "Absolutely not. She has been in too long. We need a new face. She may not be reelected." So I went on retreat, and when I came back, I was no longer superior. They had elected somebody else. I should be ashamed to admit this to you, but I will. That sense of being out of control, that sense of not being needed anymore, that sense of being too old to be of use, it really got to me. I would sit in my room alone and I would say, what was it all about? And I felt sometimes useless, sometimes wondering what had my life been all about? And then I come here. And I see your face, and your face, and your face, and all your faces. And I know what it was all about. You tell me the meaning and purpose of my life. I walk into this house and I feel the hospitality, not only of home, but of heart. I feel your care of this sacred space. I feel your witness of the gospel. I feel your goodness. I don't know that the Sisters of St. Joseph are so worried today about religious life dying out as they are about the gospel dying out. Look at the world today. Violence, hatred, racism, poverty, injustice. Then I come here and I see the gospel in action. I see your goodness, your love of the people. So you are the ones that give my life meaning and purpose, as do all our partners. The ones here at Carondelet, the ones out there. We exist today, 372 years later, because God always sent the right people at the right time, and you are the right people now. You are the ones that carry this on. You are the promise of hope that God so wants us to have. So I come today not to give you a history lesson. I come today to tell you thank you. Thank you for the gift of your lives. Thank you for being the person you are, the good person you are. We all know that this ground is sacred because this is where we came back in 1836. But those 6 sisters are moving over, and they're telling me to say to you, this ground is sacred now because you are here. Because you gift us with your lives. So I come to simply say, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. You are the right people at the right time. You are our moment now in history. You are our gift. Thank you. Well, if the truth be known, when I was province director and I worked with a team, they were given the assignment to do the assembly agenda, and I had to go to a meeting. And when I came back, I said to the other 2 on the team, did you do the assembly agenda? And they said, oh yeah, and you're gonna love the way it closes. And I said, how does it close? They said, Mother St. John Fontbonne is appearing. I said, really? Who's that? You. So that's how it started, which I think is the perfect example of why you should never miss a meeting. I don't have a script. Sometimes I jot down notes. Mostly I jot down notes when I know what the time frame is so that I don't go on and on if they only want an 8-minute something or other. But the way I really prepare is I sit down and pray to her and ask her just to do her thing, do whatever she wants. So this morning I was all nervous about doing this, and I said, now Mother, let's be real. It's not about me. It is about you. So you say what you want them to hear, but you better show up. So that's how I prepare. I ask her to tell me what she wants to say to certain people. And actually this morning I was going to close it far differently. If I had done what I thought I was going to do yesterday, it would have been very different than today. But I think she wanted the people who work here at Carondelet to know how special they are to keep this sacred space going. I think Mother wants everyone to know how valuable their lives are, each and every one. You know, we tend to reverence people like Mother St. John and put them on a pedestal and maybe even try to imitate them. But in actuality, she's no different from anybody else. When I sit and pray with her, sometimes I come up with the things that she was depressed about. You know, she went through some years of depression, I think, when she sent her 2 nieces and her nephew here and watched her brother become so sad at losing 3 children at one time. And she felt very guilty about that. So I think in lots of ways, Mother is who we all are. She has these moments of guilt, she has these moments of depression, but she came out okay. And she not only came out okay, she came out extremely well. And I think that's what she wants people to hear, that life is good, there will be hard times, but everything's gonna be okay. You know why? Because you're good and you can do it. I think that's what she wants people to hear.